for those who have just arrived. Professor J. Mohan Rao is a professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He has worked extensively on a very wide range of issues over the last 30 to 40 years, including, as we heard earlier, on issues of agriculture, economic history, and he didn't mention macroeconomics, structureless macroeconomics in particular, broader development issues of globalization, and trying to produce people who are thinkers first and methodologists and technical people second, if at all, right? And among all the teachers here and the many great professors we had the chance to encounter, Mohan was extremely preeminent in the sense that he was one of those people who insisted on that foremost, that the first thing that we should be doing is thinking very clearly about the world. Mohan's class, which everybody clamored to take, which was offered once a week because he lives 90 miles away, and he would offer the graduate development class once a week, would always be quite full, and he would walk in at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. sharp, and it always was in the evening, 6 to 9 o'clock in the evening, and just like this morning, would speak from 6 to 9 o'clock very broadly, comprehensively, and deeply about a particular issue, starting maybe in the 17th century, maybe in the 18th century, giving you a broad historical scope, giving you an extremely deep understanding if you had the energy to sit through and listen for those 3 hours about any particular topic. I recall in particular being disabused of neoclassical political economy in one lecture, which lasted from 6 to 9. I still remember that lecture now, nearly 10 years on. Today, Mohan is going to be speaking about, again, an extraordinarily, from the title, seemingly an extraordinarily broad topic, but I think very important for economists in particular, who have a particular predilection in their training. He's going to be speaking about Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark, individual choices without social relations. So, Mohan, thank you.
Thank you very much, Arjun, for those very kind words. Yes, I recall particularly my lecture on the political economy of the state, and what starting in the early 80s came to be called neoclassical political economy. It seemed like a contradiction in terms, not just a phrase. In some sense, actually, today's talk echoes some of the thoughts that I have inflicted upon my students over several decades concerning political philosophy, really. But the reason why I chose this topic for what I assume would be more than an economist's audience is because the issue that I raise, I believe, can unify all of us, no matter which branch of the social sciences we come from. So in some sense, I think I will try to deal here with the very fundamental of social science, namely the question of existence of a society, of any society. And in that sense, what I have to say here might be slightly in discord with one of the points that arose in Professor Deshpande's talk just an hour ago. He was dealing with, including especially caste, and in a sense set aside the definition of issue. But I believe that you cannot describe without defining. You cannot describe unless you know what it is that you're trying to describe. The universe doesn't come in neatly predefined packages of concepts that you can proceed then to describe. You have to impose the concepts of the universe on the universe before you can start describing. So in that sense, it's slightly discordant. But I hope to persuade you rather than merely sow discord in your heads. Second point, by way of background, I should make clear is that I will not end with any positive proposition. I'm not now venturing into high literature, but that is just the first 6 words for my talk, namely society. So let's get on with it. I should also enter a small note of apology, although I don't think apology is required. There'll be a little bit of the jargon of economics. But that little bit, I believe, is probably very important and very useful for all of the social sciences. And again, I hope to persuade you about that. So now, really, let's get on with it. So the question is to cooperate or not to cooperate, which in my view translates into, for society, to be or not to be. It's a question of existence for society that we deal with. To be rational, and this is a very homemade definition, to be rational means to seek out the best means for one's ends. The ends themselves may be, but need not be, egoistic. But to have egoistic ends means to seek out means to satisfy one's own ends without regard to the ends of others. To be egoistic in this sense does not necessarily mean that you're not altruistic. But I leave that aside. It's a relatively obscure, unnecessary issue to be taken up right now. Okay, for us, what we need to know is that to be rational means to seek out the best means for whatever one's ends may be. Now, to cooperate seems patently the right thing to do when it would lead to mutual gains. If you and I can both benefit each other by coming together and acting together, which is what we mean by cooperating, then why should we not cooperate, right? So cooperation by self-interested individuals must be rational, because it is the right choice of means in the pursuit of your own ends. But a question arises in retrospect from the development of economics and political philosophy of the past several centuries. And the question is, are mutual gains sufficient for rational individuals to cooperate? That is, will self-interested individuals cooperate? Will self-interested individuals do what they must do? Will freedom prove instead inconsistent with reason? The very mention of the verb will, of course, suggests freedom of the individuals to act he or she may please to. But on the other hand, the mention of the word rational suggests being bound by reason. So, in one sense, this question of cooperation also invokes a potential inconsistency between freedom and reason. Now, why do I dwell on cooperation in particular? Because I could have taken other issues of rational choice. I take this particular question up because this question of cooperation underlies the very existence of a society. Now, it is well known that mutual social gains come from the division of labor. Right? The division of labor is the source of wealth of any society. Adam Smith is remembered for one great contribution, namely for having shown, or tried to show, that self-interested individuals can nonetheless, through a market process, benefit each other, even though that was not a part of their ends. But Adam Smith really ought to be known for another great contribution to the social sciences, and that is his idea of the division of labor. And I'm glad to note that either the £5 sterling note or the £10 sterling note has Adam Smith's picture on the one side, and on the other side, the pin manufactory of Adam Smith's time, which is the basis on which he enunciated the idea of the division of labor. So, we have Adam Smith telling us that the division of labor is the source of wealth. Contrafactually, if you live by yourself deep in the woods, imagine the kind of standard of living you will be able to produce for yourself. Nothing, very minimal, right? A bare existence. Now compare that with the quality of life and existence that you enjoy in a civilized society. Of course, some of you might dispute that this is in fact the case, but I would like to disagree and assure you that you do indeed enjoy a better standard of life. And Smith would say that that is the consequence of the division bring people from deep inside forests in their isolation together without them agreeing to form a society and to cooperate. So that's the question. Given that mutual social gains come from the social division of labor, are mutual gains sufficient to form society itself? Now, there have been some thinkers, Durkheim is one example that comes to mind, who would have founded social science on a collective unconscious of shared values and beliefs. This is a sort of a very standard pillar of many approaches to social anthropology. And while that strand of thought does exist in the social sciences, I will set that aside in favor of the many more scientists, social scientists, who have seen the possibility of cooperation as a foundational question of rationality. Rather than, in other words, relegating the question of cooperation to our unconscious beliefs and values, the rationality approach tries to seek an explanation for it on the basis of reasoned analysis, that is, on the basis of rational choice. This is true especially of what is often called the contractarian tradition in political philosophy and political economy, in which the assumption of individual rationality is the currency, right? So this is true of John Rawls, this is true of Kenneth Arrow, this is true of most economists who have written in a political vein. This is not entirely clear. It's true of Amartya Sen, because Amartya has written entirely too much on these questions, with the result that he leaves you quite confused as exactly where he stands. This is most abundantly clear in his most recent book, The Idea of Justice. But we can reserve our critique of Sen for another day. A paradox. Merely asserting that cooperation is a shared value, example within the collective unconscious a la Durkheim, or that it is inherited via evolutionary selection, and nowadays there are evolutionary game theoretic economists who try to explain social economic phenomena, including cooperation, on the basis of selection processes, so quite analogous to the selection processes in nature, in the survival of species and so on. But while these approaches exist, they cannot satisfy those, and that certainly includes me, who want the question to be adjudicated only by rationality, only by reason. If I cannot reason into doing what I do, I will not be satisfied. And I hope that would apply to you and all of us. So I'm making clear, where I'm coming from. So this is, if you like, a certain selection bias on my part. I'm not satisfied by the alternatives. Now, following game theory, and I immediately want to assure you that this is not meant to scare you, but game theory is just a way of thinking through carefully certain social situations. So following game theory, modern social science finds that paradoxically, cooperation is impossible. I repeat, cooperation is impossible precisely if and when all individuals are rational. This is a long-standing conclusion of game theory. It's about 60 years old. Of course, if all people are not rational, cooperation of a sort can obtain relatively easily, but we would not characterize that as anything like serious cooperation, because some sort of collusion, some sort of exploitation might be involved. So you have to imagine some people are rational, some people are not very rational. Okay, some people are, non-rational people are very happy to cooperate with the other guys, and the other guys take them for a long ride. Okay, cooperation of a sort ensues, but that is not what I would dignify with the word cooperation. I would rather call it collusion or something worse. So now let's go through a very simple exercise, which perhaps many of you are familiar. Is there anybody in the audience who has never heard of the business dilemma game? Okay, so let me just walk through it in very simple terms and relatively quickly. There are two guys, two persons, Agent I and Agent J. They were caught in a stolen vehicle, arrested, put and then they were to be presented the following day before the court, the judge, or before the jury. They were put in two separate cells, so they could not talk to each other. And each of these agents had two choices before him. When they were caught with the stolen car, they could, of course, not deny that they had stolen the car, because that's proof positive. But it happened that the stolen car was also implicated in a murder. The question was whether they had actually carried out the murder as well as stealing the car. So there are two choices. Confess to the murder, do not confess to the murder. And both are in symmetric situations, so the row agent I has two alternatives. The column agent J also has two alternatives, symmetric alternatives. Inside each of the cells of the matrix, for example, agent J confesses, agent I confesses, that takes you into the northwest cell. I have the numbers 20 and 20. They indicate the number of years of prison time that they would have to serve according to law. So if they both confess, they are murderers. But because they did confess, they cooperated with the state, they would get a relatively lenient, but still a very strong, heavy sentence of 20 years. If neither of them confessed, they would end up in the southeast corner. The state has no proof that they are murderers, but they would still go to jail for 3 years for having stolen a car. Then there are the off-diagonal elements. Let's say the southwest corner where I do not confess, but the other guy confesses. In that case, agent J gets 1 year and agent I gets 30 years. In the opposite instance, where I confess and agent J does not confess, I get 1 year and agent J gets 30 years. So the question is, what should each person do? In I's reasoning, that is in the conventional reasoning, if J confesses, I am best off confessing. On the other hand, if J does not confess, again, I'm best off confessing. So no matter what J does, I should confess. That would seem to be the conclusion. But this is, notice, a conditional conclusion. Why is it conditional? Because each time I'm assuming if the other guy does this, if the other guy does that. I don't know for sure what the other guy is going to do, but I'm making that assumption and arriving at my conclusions accordingly. The third point to note here is that I must not trust any prior agreement not to confess. Suppose the two chaps in the car before they were arrested had agreed with each other. No matter what happens, we shall never confess to the law that we have murdered, in the event that we have murdered. Or even otherwise, we shall never confess. So I must not trust any prior agreement not to confess, because it is not in the best interest of either to keep to that agreement. In other words, even if you and I, the two agents, agree not to confess under any circumstance, on the day of the court hearing, one of us could renege, or both of us could renege. So if I'm acting in my best interest, I better not trust any such agreement, because it's really not enforceable. So this is the basis on which we arrive at what will actually happen in this situation. Both individuals will confess, will both end up in jail, serving 20 years, and would have foregone the opportunity of serving only 3 years' time, whether or not they committed the crime. And that, of course, is a very unhappy outcome. Right? If they had cooperated, they would have ended up with a much happier, less unhappy outcome. So, the prisoner's dilemma illustrates, first, the mutuality of gains from cooperation. Okay? But second, it also seems to suggest the rational impossibility of cooperation. So cooperation cannot be rationalized, apparently, on the basis of individual rationality. Now, here is a critique, a possible critique. Now, if you follow the reasoning of the game that I've just described, it would seem that nothing could be more counterproductive to a rational solution than any agent who is described to be a rational agent. In other words, paradoxically, relatively irrational people might use, quote, either common sense or their trusting natures, their naive natures, if you like, to go ahead and cooperate and not to confess and actually benefit from cooperation. Whereas it's a rational, calculating, thoughtful, reasoning individuals, self-interested of course, who arrives at a calculated, self-destructive outcome. Now, this model of thinking about individual action based on rationality is what many people call the rational actor model. It's also called Homo economicus. Okay, I like the rational actor model because it has a nice acronym which I shall use. We'll call it RAM for short. How can rational agents fail to reach the rational solution? How is it possible? Especially given the reasoning that I spelled out early on, right? Rational agents must, they ought to cooperate because it's in their best interest to do so. Is this, therefore, a failure of rationality itself? Or only a failure of the theory of the rational agent? In other words, it's only a failure of the RAM model of the rational person, rather than a failure of rationality itself. Because to say that there is failure of rationality itself, in some sense, implicates reason itself, right? Failure of reason itself. All right, I leave that question aside. I come back to that. Meanwhile, what should an impartial observer, and let's suppose we are all impartial observers of these two guys sitting in their jail cells and we are observing them from satellite, from a distance, what should the impartial observer do faced with his own analysis of the prisoner's dilemma? In other words, I'm saying, let's suppose this analysis is right, and I've made this analysis, reached the conclusion, left to their own devices, these two chats are not going to cooperate, and therefore self-destruct. I'm the impartial observer, what should I do? I mean, this question is like, what should the theorist do when he diagnoses the impossibility of social cooperation? What does he do in terms of that finding? How does he relate to the rest of society? Does he tell them, look, you know, you're going to self-destruct if you act rationally, don't act rationally, or some such intervention, policy intervention, as you might call it. Should I, the impartial observer, describe what must be the fate of the prisoners, like fate? Oh, you're rational and therefore you're bound to self-destruct, that's your fate. Or prescribe what will be a way out of the dilemma. Here's an instance of the impartial observer. My favorite cartoonist from the Boston Globe, Wasserman, and the problem of the lemmings. Okay. Should we want them? And this is in the context of global warming. By the way, global warming is a very good example of the prisoner's dilemma potentially. And as we all know, in principle, we could all self-destruct. And all indications are we are well on the road to self-destruction. So, now I present the critique. For the purpose of this critique, I will invoke simply the characteristic of symmetry, not just between the players, that is evident, but also symmetry between the theorist and the players. After all, no social scientist stands outside society. He may pretend to, she may pretend to, but does not, in fact. Right? He may pretend to have an Archimedean position outside the planet, trying to move it, but in fact that's not true. All social scientists are members of society in the first place. So take symmetry between the players and the theorists. Now, the standard solution, the solution that I've just described, the rational actor model solution, do not cooperate, no cooperation, can be given by the theorist only on the knowledge that all players are rational, right? Because remember, the whole analysis was conducted on the assumption that both are rational agents. Okay? And they both seek their self-interested ends, and they both arrive at this do not cooperate solution. So the theorist is aware that everybody is rational. The theorist is a member of society. And on grounds of symmetry alone, I would therefore want to and should everybody is rational. I'm insisting that the players themselves know everybody is rational. Okay? So I'm going to invoke that, what is called common knowledge assumption, common knowledge of rationality. So everybody knows everybody is rational. The second aspect of symmetry is even more important, and that is we need to deal with the whole and not with parts. What do I mean by that? Given that there is common knowledge, given that all the players know that all the players are rational, a rational player cannot simultaneously and consistently seek a rational solution for himself, yet suppose hypothetical solutions for others. Okay. What am I asking myself? The question, what should I do? That's the question I'm asking as a rational agent. But I know the other guy is rational. So I should infer that the other guy is also asking the same question. What should I do? Right? So everybody knows, everybody is asking the same question. What should I do? If so, the invocation of those ifs is completely out of place. You understand? The ifs which are in red remarks, right? Why? Because as soon as I say if the other guy cooperates in one alternative and the other alternative, if the other guy does not cooperate, what am I saying? I'm saying I do not know what the other guy is actually going to do. And yet what am I trying to find out? The answer to the question, what should a rational guy do? That would be inconsistent. Because on the one hand, I'm trying to prescribe for myself what I should do. On the other hand, I'm assuming that the other guy may do either this or that, notwithstanding the fact that he's rational. Okay, so that's the symmetry between players that I'm invoking here. And if I invoke symmetry, then consistency demands that the players recognize that symmetry itself. Okay? So now let's look at the solution again. Okay? Same problem. Agent I, agent J. Now I invoke symmetry. I don't say if J cooperates, what should I do? If J does not cooperate, what should I do? I don't engage in hypothetical reasoning. So what's my reasoning? My reasoning is we are both rational. Whatever I find it rational to do, you will find it rational to do. Whatever you find it rational to do, I will find it rational to do. In other words, our actions will be symmetric. But if actions are symmetric, outcomes must be on the diagonal. But if outcomes are on the diagonal, there are only two outcomes, it is very clear which is the superior outcome. That's in the southeast. So, if I'm looking at the whole problem and producing a consistent solution, and by the way, consistency is practically equal to the meaning of rationality. If you think about it. In ordinary parlance, when people say rational, they usually mean consistent. In fact, there are actually multiple axioms of rationality, 3 in fact, and the third one is very important, and that is the transitivity axiom. Okay? And that is related to the question of consistency. So consistency and rationality are not quite the same thing, but they're very nearly the same thing. Okay? So if I'm going to act consistently, then I will choose the alternative not to confess. And voila, all of a sudden, you have the exact opposite solution. Cooperate is the rational solution. Okay? So in other words, we have two models. Both claim to be rational actor models. The first one, which is the standard solution, which everybody accepts in the literature. Some of you have seen the movie called A Beautiful Mind. The story of John Nash, who was given the Nobel Prize in economics. One of his early discoveries was about the Nash solution. Well, it's somewhat anachronistic to say that Nash discovered the Nash solution. But we know his solution to be the Nash solution. And in this instance, the Nash solution is a non-cooperative solution. But by the second reasoning of the rational actor model, with merely the addition of the symmetry assumption, I arrive at the opposite of the Nash solution, the anti-Nash solution, but the pro-cooperation solution. It's very congenial, conducive to my hope, at least, that people will in fact cooperate. Just a footnote here, if common knowledge was indeed untenable, remember I invoked the assumption of common knowledge, that everybody knows, everybody is rational, then neither can the theorist insist on the Nash solution as a solution, because he also would not have common knowledge, because I insist on symmetry between the social scientist and the agents he's describing. I mean, I'm kind of describing what is prescribed to doctors, physicians, heal thyself. I'm saying social scientists recognize that you're a member of society. So by that dictum, I think this footnote is not very significant, but it's there for completeness. So it seems we are faced with a dilemma about a dilemma. Right? And the dilemma can be expressed as a dilemma between choices versus relations. The critique that I presented says rationality entails solving the whole problem. Just as the theorist always tries to solve the whole problem, the players should also try to solve the whole problem if they are rational. No theorist worth his salt, by the way, would claim that he's not rational. Have you ever come across a theorist who claims that he's not rational? Even believers in irrationality in the rest of the population will not make that confession out. Okay? But by that green critique, which is sort of my favorite critique, rationality entails solving the whole problem, and that whole problem is a relational problem. Why is it a relational problem? Remember, both symmetric relations I've invoked are social relationships. One is the relationship between the scientist and the society he's trying to describe, or prescribe to. The other is the relationship between the players themselves, between members of society. By the way, the prisoner's dilemma is a highly artificial construct, you recognize, but it's very useful, very instructive, very heuristically relevant for analyzing the sorts of questions we are analyzing. But there is a counter-critique. Okay? So what might the counter-critique be? Well, I shouldn't say there is. I should say there might be a counter-critique. I say that because the green critique has not been properly considered by any game theorist I know of, or anywhere in the literature. So I now imagine what the counter-critique might be, and it might go as follows. Rationality entails solving one's own ends-means problems. In other words, it's a pure choice problem without regard to ends-means problems of others or of society taken as a whole. In other words, this view of rationality says rationality is all about individual choices, not about relations. We seem, therefore, to be left with not having a rational basis, but deciding between rival claims regarding what constitutes the rational solution to the prisoner's dilemma. That is a dilemma or a dilemma. And specifically, it becomes a definitional dilemma. What is the definition of rationality? Solving the whole problem or solving part problems? Now, indecisive individual rationality means the rational basis of cooperation and of society is undecidable. Social science must be fundamentally incomplete. Social science must be fundamentally incomplete. Social contractarians must have been wrong all along to have imagined the possibility of constructing rational solutions to the problem of constructing a society. Political philosophy is fundamentally impossible on the foundation of rationality. Those would be the very pessimistic conclusions that would follow, even if you said that there is merely a dilemma and did not side the Nash solution, side with the Nash solution. But there is a third issue. There is a third issue. It's not just those two solutions, but there is a third issue which we really need to consider. So let me turn to that third issue. First of all, I preface that by saying that one need not, indeed one must not choose between the symmetric and asymmetric solutions, because the prisoner's dilemma game incorrectly poses what I would call, after Saddam Hussein, the mother of all cooperation problems. That is the rational formation of society. By the way, the prisoner's dilemma can be used to describe a variety of cooperation problems in society. Cooperation here, cooperation there, cooperation in third place, and so on. You can pick whatever examples you want. But the mother dilemmas nested inside, as I said, the mother of all, business dilemma. Okay. Now, when you consider that game, the big one, right, the mother of all, where payoffs are themselves endogenous. Remember, I wrote down those numbers which I called payoffs, and I didn't call them payoffs, now I call them payoffs. What each person gets by way of reward or punishment, as the case might be, those things are called payoffs, those numbers inside the matrix. Now, those payoffs really should be considered to be endogenous when you're looking at the whole society coming together. The whole society forming itself. Why? Why? Because, listen, nobody gives you a neat little matrix where all the numbers are fixed and says, look, you guys decide whether you want to cooperate or not. Why? Because once society is formed, what is society capable of doing? Rewriting the payoffs in the southeast cell. In the southeast cell is where the cooperation takes place, right? If we cooperate and if we create a society, that society can decide what the payoff should be. It can decide whether there will be OBC reservations or not, relevant to the previous session's discussion. It can decide whether there should be redistribution of income from the rich to the poor or not. Whether there should be a tax cut for the rich, with the rest of us paying for it, a la George W. Bush. And so on. We can go down the long list, but the point is made. The point is that in the southeast, the payoffs are not fixed. They are endogenous. They are variable. They can be manipulated or restructured by society as it pleases. But just let's say that those payoffs are endogenous in the southeast corner. Unfortunately, that does nothing to resolve the problem that we have. Remember, we said there's Nash solution, do not cooperate. There is the critique solution, symmetric solution, it says cooperate. Then we raise the problem of the dilemma about the dilemma because, you know, it becomes a definitional dispute between the two solutions. And then now I introduce my own argument that payoffs are endogenous when cooperation does take place. And I'm saying that doesn't do anything to solve the problem. And this matrix makes that clear. It's the same matrix, well, it's not quite the same matrix. I now sort of change the substantive description of the game. Instead of prisoners being caught in a crime, this is really a kind of a more realistic description of society. I and J have two sorts of alternatives: evade taxes or pay taxes, or equivalently, skirt the laws or obey the laws. It's a very typical kind of governance issue, right, in running a proper society that arises. Those same choices are open to J. Of course, if both evade taxes or skirt the laws, the payoffs are pretty bad. But if both pay taxes or obey the laws, the payoffs are much better in the southeast. Okay? And then once again, you can get those two solutions, you know, the dilemma of dilemma solutions, both the solutions. But the problem is, with my third objection, the southeast is not predetermined to be 1400 and 2600 as the payoff, but simply determined to be a sum. That's what that Greek sign stands for, sigma, sum. The sum of the payoffs is 4,000. That 4,000 could be divided in a variety of ways. One guy getting 20 and the other person getting 3,980 in principle, and so on. Or simply equally, 2,000, 2,000. So multiplicity of solutions is possible. So that issue, that third question, raises the question of what would cooperators do if they cooperated in terms of dividing the social pie. The problem with this question is, it is premised on the hypothesis that these two guys are cooperating. But the whole question was, should they cooperate or not? So it assumes a solution to answer the division of payoffs question. You can't assume the solution to any question, can you? No, it doesn't make any sense, right? Which brings me to some concluding comments, and I hope I'll be on time in terms of finishing it in 45 minutes. This is what I call the Rand dogma. So what is the Rand dogma? The Rand dogma is this, that rationally to produce the basis of society, in this case, cooperation, and also the basis of every component institution of society, because I would suggest to you that when properly conceived and properly formulated, every other question of institution formation in a society, institution simply is another word for rule, so every instance of rule formation in society could be described along the same lines as the prisoner's dilemma that we have been discussing in relation to the formation of the whole society. So the Rand dogma, that is the economist dogma, or certainly a certain type of economist, mainstream economist, dogmatically believe that the model of the rational actor is entirely sufficient to produce the rational basis for society. Of course, that harkens back to the Nash solution. Harkens back to the opposite of the Nash solution, but there is no basis within game theory for the opposite of the Nash solution. Mainstream economists, and nowadays we can happily invoke political scientists, because political science, at least as I see it, has been invaded by economists. So mainstream economists and political scientists insistently use the dogma to ram through a conservative right-wing agenda. Now you know why I use the word RAM, the acronym RAM, because the rational actor model has been used to ram through very conservative agendas, right-wing agendas. Now, of course, you might ask me to justify this claim. That'll take too much time, but it's plain as a hill. Just look out the window and you know what I'm talking about. You leave it to economists and they'll invoke RAM and they'll ram through standard solutions. Referring all descriptive and prescriptive questions to the choices of individuals without reference to social relations. Okay? This is the economist's dogma. How to do social science without social relations. That is the economist's problem. By the way, interestingly enough, Professor Deshpande referred to Abba Lerner's dictum in the previous talk. You remember, Abba Lerner, a very famous economist in the 1930s at the London School, he made the statement that economics has earned the title of the queen of the social sciences only by considering solved political problems. Okay? Why? Because a solved political problem has no social juice in it. It's been sucked out. Social juice has been sucked out, assumed away. All you're left with is a dry as dust technical problem. Happily steps in the economist and says, here's the solution. Pareto optimality, blah, 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 and rams it down your throat. And he says, this is science, this is economic science, and it's justified by the Nobel Prizes we all get, and so on. No reference to social justice. At a minimum, our argument demonstrates that there is no warrant for the dogma, nor to the conclusions drawn from the theory. Last slide. Not just to be or not to be, but whether to merely predict or also to prescribe. For this, you have to ask the question, what is our purpose? And I include all of us because I assume all of us are in the same business of studying societies, which is, I think, more or less true. We are social scientists, I believe. So what is our purpose? What is our purpose? The theorist does not merely describe what might happen, but usually aims to prescribe what ought to be done. Again, this is a claim which I will be happy to justify if we have enough time. Galileo did not describe the solar system to prescribe what the sun should do or what the planet Venus ought to do and so on. Although the church thought he should and imprisoned him in his house and made him confess. And the old man, under his breath, was heard muttering, "Eppure si muove," meaning, even so it moves. Meaning the earth moves around the sun. So even the study of planetary systems is not completely independent of our prescriptive projects, our valuation projects. The earth better not move around the sun. The sun better move around the earth. We say so. in fact, by the way, this is true. This is very true. We, generally social scientists, especially economists, we invoke the prisoner's dilemma very often in order to draw precisely the lessons for institutional design and policy choices that can help avoid the dilemma in the first place. You know, economists, social scientists, they will periodically, regularly trot out the prisoner's dilemma. To say what? To say, look, we're faced with the solution and it's going to lead to self-destruction, tragedy of the commons, global warming, whatever it is. You don't just trot it out. You want to influence the world, hopefully, in the right direction. So you trot it out to say you want to avoid the situation. So there's a prescriptive project behind social science, I think in almost all cases. I mean, I stand on the foundations of none less than Gunnar Myrdal, who believed that there is no view in social science without a viewpoint. He was a great believer that social science is pursued for normative purposes, never as a disinterested exercise. But it seems impossible to evaluate without having a valuation criterion. You cannot get an ought statement from an is statement, David Hume. The most basic ought, for example, that the economists invoke, is quite a reasonable ought that would take another lecture to justify, the concept of Pareto optimization. That is, you should always be at a situation where nobody's situation can be improved without worsening at least one other person's situation. You ought not to be at a situation where at least one person's situation can be improved without worsening anybody else's situation. This simple idea
into society. That is the key axiom of the Durkheimian, or this, if you will, sociological tradition. So once you start from that axiom, the entire question is obviated. Obviously we cooperate. The division of labor is there because we cannot reproduce the means of our own material existence individually. We just can't do it. We are fragile individually. We are feeble as individuals. So we come in groups because that's the way we reproduce ourselves. And then we divide that up in various ways. We arrive at different methods of solidarity, mechanical and organic and so on and so on, and arrive at it that way. So for me, this is a fantastic ground clearing exercise that then allows us, I think, to go back and reassess that other that tradition that has been sort of forsaken, relatively speaking, as you rightly say. But that for me, so we're not left with as gloomy a picture as I think you left us with, because I think that other tradition is very robust.
The question. First of all, in a sense, the question has already been answered because I stated along the way that it is my starting position that I would never rest content until I find an assumption that gives me support from reason, not from fiat, not from assumptions of continuity and inheritance and so on, which in a sense I think your argument invokes. Because when you say we have always been living such and such, that we are inherently incapable of producing a subsistence for ourselves and so on, you're saying, look, there's no point in disputing this idle dispute, perhaps an idle dispute, because it's irrelevant. Societies have always existed, and so on and so forth. Now, perhaps that satisfies you, perhaps it satisfies Durkheim, but I've already stated that it doesn't satisfy me, and I'm hardly alone in this respect. It doesn't satisfy many, many people, amongst them economists, philosophers, many political scientists, and some others as well. And let me again state that this is a true paradox that we are describing here, both Arrow's theorem as well as the dilemmas that I described today. It's a true paradox because we reason our way to the conclusion that reason does not give us an answer. Very strange thing. We get an answer based on reason, that an answer based on reason is not possible. It's a self-referential paradox. And some people love self-referential paradoxes. Some logicians love it, some philosophers love it, and so on. Don't get me wrong, I also love self-referential paradoxes. logical delight. But that doesn't satisfy the quest for a rational solution for real problems. You might say, well, I've not actually been talking about a real problem, but I think I have then. If you take Thomas Hobbes, the first modern philosopher, I was going to say political philosopher, but we could practically say first modern philosopher, was born in the last decade of the 16th century when the Spanish Armada was standing right out of the port where his mother was giving him birth. Okay? And the rest of his life, the rest of his entire life, was driven by the prospect of bloody civil war in England. Okay? I'm talking about the bloody years of the 17th century. And he had to run away with the king to France, where he hid for 20, 25 years and returned a fairly old man before he wrote his famous book, The Leviathan, where he argued about the state of nature, etc. You know, that concept, which activates all of modern political philosophy, is taken up by many eminences along the way, whom I don't have to tell you about. So all I'm saying is I'm not alone in taking the stance that I'm taking, and therefore the conclusion itself is a paradox. But let me add an optimistic note, because you quite rightly saw this perhaps as a pessimistic exercise, but I do not. Actually, I do not. The reason why I say that is because I've come to believe that what's going wrong in these kinds of exercises has nothing to do with the deficiency of reason. I believe it has to do with the deficiency of our reasoning. Okay? And in particular, it has to do with our unjustified invocation of what is called the law of the excluded middle. If something is either X or it is not X. Okay? It cannot be both X and not X. That would be an inconsistency. That's true. But there is a fourth alternative, namely that something might be neither X nor not X. I mean, I'm sure this has befuddled most of you, but I do want to, the general idea I want to leave you with, even if this idea is very far from some of you, the general idea I want to leave you with, that I remain optimistic, contrary to the conclusion that you've drawn, is that we might yet be able to reason through a rational solution. But if and when we do that, that would not only provide a solution to the problem that I've posed, but also require a reformulation of the very concept of reason or of logic. Well, having gone that far, as I lived my life, so I can go this additional part. Question?
Sir, you said that if we think about things more in terms of rationality, then everyone, if we think that we are rational, we should think the other agent is rational as well, if I understand right. So how...
If the theorist thinks...
If the theorist thinks...
that everybody is rational. Then the player should have the same privilege.
Right. So we should always arrive at the corner where none of the prisoners ever confess. So how do we explain the problem of common in that case, which happens, right? So do we consider individuals irrational, or...
Be my guest. Yes, why not? You see, this is also normative exercise. This is a normative exercise. You see, the very question of whether people should be bound by reason or not is a choice for them. See, Hamlet is in this, in this picture for good reason. Hamlet was confused about every one of his relationships, with his uncle, with his mother, with his girlfriend, whom he sent to her death untimely, and so on. He's confused with his soul. So Hamlet is here for a good reason. So we are free to be irrational. Somebody might say, I will not follow reason. What can you do? I
So then won't it be rational on the part of the agents who are being, if we are looking at two players in the prisoner's dilemma, that if this is the case that the other person can be irrational, then won't the rational solution in this case would be confess and confess?
No, but you've got to expand the problem to the end person situation.
Right.
Which is more realistic. If you're talking about Saddam Hussein's problem, no society is just two people. Realistically, n will be a large number. And then, if you want a general answer, you would have to make a general claim about the rationality or irrationality of all agents. See, otherwise you're going to get chaotic solutions. You're going to get solutions in all the corners and you don't know which solution.
Can I ask
you
another?
Yeah, sure.
So in that case, then the mechanism design literature, where we think of these mechanisms to which brings back the solutions to the ideal solution, the derailed ones. So that won't be really relevant if everyone starts acting rationally, right?
That's right. And remember, the literature on mechanism design is itself nested inside this mother of all. That's why this mother of all is a very important part of the statement.
Again, at the risk of sort of plunging this from the sublime to the mundane, if not the ridiculous. Suppose we do isolate things in a laboratory like experimental economists do, and run prisoners' dilemmas, and then find the usual conclusion that not everyone goes to the expected corner, but there's some amount of trust which comes out even in these clear dominant strategy kind of games. Right. So, without abandoning rationality and without necessarily going into some of the larger issues of where you have n persons and you have endogenous outcome.
Arrived at some just so stories and just so predictions and so on, and he said tit for tat often wins. But he did not invoke any principle of rationality. He did not seek a principle solution, you understand? That's why he was simulating in a computer or through game playing. Whereas this is also an answer, same as the answer to the first question, which is that when you're starting with an axiomatic approach, which is where you invoke rationality as the first principle, then what you're really doing is seeking a principle solution. And this I'm not alone, because that's what game theorists have been doing all the time, by the way. The Rappaports are